By working alongside the Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee, donors can make more possible right here at home. The Community Foundation's expert team connects individuals to organizations that make a difference on issues of concern for Middle Tennesseans and connect donors to a network of like-minded contributors invested in the community. This holiday season, make more possible through the power of community giving. Learn more at cfmt.org.
Hello and welcome to the Nashville Scene Podcast. I'm your host, D. Patrick Rogers, editor-in-chief of the Nashville Scene. We are without my wonderful co-host, Jerome Moore, this week. Sadly, the bug got him. It's his turn to get sick. He covered for me a couple episodes ago. I'm covering for him this time. But we have a couple of great guests with us today. We're going to talk about the Tennessee General Assembly, the special session, which just wrapped as we record this, and on into the regular session. Joining me today are Nicole Prano. To my left, Nicole is both a reporter for The Scene and our sister publications and the editor of Williamson Scene, our sister publication, pretty recently launched, right?
Yep, back in October.
Back in October. You wear many hats.
That I do.
So thank you for also putting on the podcast guest hat with us.
I'm happy to be here.
Great. And we've also got Eli Modica, who viewers and listeners will know who's been on a few times at this point. This is like episode 3 or 4 or something, right?
Yeah, I'm not counting.
Oh, okay.
You know, it's my job. You tell me I show up.
I love it. Wow, that's great. I might just make you our third co-host in that case. So we're recording on Friday. The special session of the state legislature wrapped yesterday, the 30th. And of course, we got a little recess before we go into the regular session. This is pretty abnormal to have a special session sort of right in the middle at the top of a legislative session, right? So Governor Bill Lee called the special session with sort of 3 central pieces of legislation: education, disaster relief, immigration. And we've had special sessions before in recent years. For instance, last year, or 2023, the special session on safety, sort of gun-related stuff after the Covenant School shooting in 2023. But usually we see special sessions focused on really just one thing. And this one's sort of 3 big platforms, right? Unusual.
Yeah.
The biggest one, of course, being education. Some call it vouchers. Democrats will call it the voucher scam. Republicans will call it school choice, right? We can get into
school freedom, even.
School freedom, scholarships, yeah. And we can get into like what that messaging is all about. But Nicole, you've had a close eye on this, so why don't you sort of give us the upshot of the education piece of this special session?
Yeah, so Republicans passed legislation that says 20,000 students can receive scholarships or vouchers for around $7,000 apiece to attend a private school. So it's public tax dollars that are going towards private schools, which is what a lot of Democrats and other opposition has a problem with.
Right. Democrats, not even just Democrats. Actually, important to point out, this was not a party line vote. Tennessee, of course, has a Republican supermajority. That means in both the House and the Senate, our 2 chambers, Republicans vastly outnumber Democrats. A supermajority is when Democrats don't even need to show up to get quorum. That means if just Republicans show up, that's technically enough for a vote, right? I think it's something like 3-1 Republican to Democrat in the House and 4-1 in the Senate. But it didn't pass right along party lines. There were some Republicans who opposed this, right?
Yeah, pretty significantly. The vote was 54-44 and 1 present not voting.
Wow.
So there were a lot of Republicans who sided with Democrats on this in the House. And in the Senate, too. The Senate vote was 20-13, which is pretty close for a Senate vote as well.
That's 7 Republicans in the Senate.
I believe so.
So across that party line. Who was voting against it? Because, you know, the governor has been sort of trying to pass this. It failed last year. Basically what happens is the Senate and the House couldn't get together on versions of the legislation.
Right.
And he came back, and this time it was sort of like, we're a unified front, but still not. So who was voting against it, aside from the Democrats who pretty much by and large oppose this ideologically.
I mean, there are a lot of Republicans who opposed it for different reasons. You know, I mean, one that comes to mind mainly that was the most vocal about it probably was Todd Warner, who is a Williamson County and Marshall County Republican. He wrote an op-ed in the Tennessean even about why he opposed it. He said even, you know, this time around, we should just wait and see what Trump is potentially going to do with, you know, his changes to education. So.
And also there's sort of a what they call a pilot version of this, right? And I think Charlene Oliver was one of the Democrats, Nashville Democrat, who pointed out we haven't even really seen all of the data from whether or not that worked, whether or not the recipients of these vouchers are doing any better than they were in public schools. You know, I think she kind of made an analogy to like, if I were a CEO and I brought my board a big change, I would want to show them why this is the right change.
Yeah, the education savings account is what people were referring to when they were talking about that, which is in, you know, Davidson County and Shelby County. And for the last few years, you know, we've been just starting that, really.
Yeah.
So we don't have the data. She's right. And it was brought up a lot in committees during the week as well, which I think was really important. That's something that just as a part of this special session, with there being 3 major pieces that we were trying to get through, we moved 7 bills total through committees in like a week's time, which is not that unusual. Usually they move, you know, several bills at once throughout the session as they're moving hundreds of bills. But I mean, it was just such weighty legislation. Democrats really complained about the process being so quick and the debate not being able to be held.
Yeah.
That was one of my takeaways too, is that as far as 4 days of legislative work, it was incredibly efficient. And that makes me think that, especially if you see William Lamberth taking either the speakership or the governorship into the future, that we may just see a special session whenever Republicans decide that they really want to pass something quickly.
Yeah, and as you noted, it was 7 pieces of legislation. In a regular session, there's usually several hundred. It's north of 1,000, I want to say. I can't remember the exact number, but you know, and these are all in various points and committees and going through to House votes and all this. But this was like boom, boom, boom. Between Monday and Thursday, these things just snapped through. And yeah, and like not a lot of time for debate on the House floor, you know, people pretty limited in their time.
Yeah, well, and they did something new even on the floor where they had each side, Republicans and Democrats, were allowed to debate for 45 minutes each. Each of the leaders got up and like called out representatives and gave them, you know, however much time for them to use within that 45 minutes of the party stuff, which was interesting on the Republican side because you had a lot of those Republicans who were no votes, which under the old, you know, rules and system could have gotten up and raised their hand and given their opinion. But this time we're, you know, probably not allowed to speak, you know.
Yeah.
There were a handful of no votes, but they were given about like 30 seconds to say their piece. And
after that bit of time, that sort of just the mic is off and that's that, and that's what you get.
Right.
Does it feel like we're moving in a more democratic direction or less democratic? I don't mean capital D, I mean lowercase d.
I mean, if you ask the capital D Democrats, you know, I think they definitely say that we're moving in a less democratic direction.
Yeah, yeah.
And cutting off debate, I think, you know, really does concern the public, too, because the public needs as much time as possible to hear all sides, you know, and to confer with their legislators and all of that. That was something that a lot of people, Republicans and Democrats, had issue with, is that they couldn't take this new piece of legislation home to their districts and discuss it with their constituents, you know, and Republicans would say, well, we've been discussing education for forever.
Yeah.
You know, we've been talking about this, you know, how your districts feel, which to an extent that's true. But there's a lot of stuff in this legislation, aside from the vouchers even, that's different. So,
yeah. And you saw some, I can't recall if it was Warner or somebody else, but people talking about like, I mean, the people in my district don't want this, you know. Lamberth and Sexton, these are the party leaders. You know, they say things like, listen to your district. And some, like, rural Republicans were like, I am. This is not what they want.
Yeah.
And, you know, we don't have to get, like, into the nitty-gritty of the bill, but also $7,000 per student. Is that, you know, that's not a lot.
No, it's not a lot, but it is like the average amount that TISA, which is the funding formula for public schools, allocates about per student, which is where they drew that number from, which is why people make the equivalent that you must be pulling these from public school, you know, monies, which they say they're not. They say there's a what's called a hold harmless provision in the bill, which sets a funding floor so that if students leave a district, the district is not penalized in the formula for that loss of student. So their funding remains the same. But in the fiscal note of the bill, which explains the money and how it moves, while there's no change in this first year in which it's implemented, public schools do lose money in the following fiscal year, 26-27, and the years following that could lose even more.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's right there in the fiscal note in black and white, as some of the Democrats pointed out, and Republicans really did not, clarify or make that known.
And a lot of folks showing up at the Capitol to protest, calling it the voucher scam. I mean, it's essentially, you got public funds going to students who are paying private school tuitions, and of course, private schools don't have to abide by, there's no curriculum that they have to follow. You can, these can be, Christian schools or any number of things, sort of teaching whatever curriculum they
I think it was Bo Mitchell brought up something that I did not know, but apparently on the list of approved schools, there's several virtual schools that are based in other states.
That can't be possible because the bill does say, it has to have a Tennessee... Well, I guess it could be possible if they're maybe somewhere else, but they have a Tennessee presence. They have to have a physical Tennessee presence. Mm-hmm. So, if a school is based in Davidson County and has a virtual component, it can take kids from Memphis, because it has a physical presence in the state. Okay. And they also have to be category 1, 2, and 3 schools, which require certain kinds of testing. And that's all, it's all different from how public schools are run, still at the same time. But there's some requirements.
Yeah.
It suggests to me that there might be some litigation.
I wouldn't be surprised.
There's definitely going to be, and we're going to get into one piece of legislation that passed that will very, very likely be litigated against. But I do want to get into the second pillar of what this special session was all about, which was disaster relief. And a lot of folks, sort of maybe nationally, don't think about the fact that East Tennessee was really impacted by Hurricane Helene, and a big part of this. And there was some criticism about the fact that North Carolina got funds for disaster recovery within days, couple of weeks of Hurricane Helene. And then here we are couple months afterward, and we're just sort of figuring this out.
They've had several special sessions by now.
Yeah.
More than one.
Yeah. North Carolina's just on the ball with this.
Yeah, they've passed several rounds of disaster relief funding in the time that we've waited, and then lumped it in with other things as well.
Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee transforms thoughtful generosity into lasting positive change, connecting donors with nonprofits to build a thriving, inclusive Nashville. As a trusted partner and convener, CFMT helps caring residents make a meaningful impact today and for generations to come.
Learn more at cfmt.org.
Well, Eli, you did a little bit of reporting sort of early on before the special session about these East Tennessee legislators looking for that money and that sort of thing. So you've got...
Yeah, Nicole and I were both in the Capitol trying to get a countdown right before the special session started, the week before the special session started, about some of these swing votes. A lot of them are rural legislators. Mm-hmm. And there's an overlap between rural legislators who are opponents, or at least on the fence, opponents of vouchers are on the fence about vouchers, and representatives in East Tennessee who need some money or some help, some aid to recover from Hurricane Helene. Mm-hmm. And it's about 7 or 8 legislators, and they split roughly even on the final vote. Enough to pass, obviously. Mm-hmm. But there were, representatives like Crawford. We were in his office, or I was in his office a week before, and then I went and told Nicole about what happened. Mm-hmm. Who kind of got moved by that, especially that hold harmless provision, guaranteeing their public schools money for an undetermined amount of time with a lot of unknowns. They got moved, they got softened, and they ended up going from skeptics to middle to yes votes over the last year, 6 months or so. Mm-hmm.
I kept hearing on the Hill all week how the hold harmless provision was a reason they felt good about it.
Really?
And several times even I would even press and ask, well, did you see the fiscal note? And they would be like, well, yeah, but it's going to be fine. Mm-hmm. And I was like, are you sure?
Yeah. And a lot of them also acknowledged that their mayors, that their local business leaders and residents needed money, this hurricane relief money. And there were some county mayors that wrote a letter supporting vouchers like a week before the special session. So there are lots of cross signals about disaster money, vouchers, and where some of these representatives, some of them are first or second term representatives like Melissa Alexander and Renee Jones, and they're kind of new to the Capitol machine. About the Democrats, of course, were saying if Governor Lee doesn't get your voucher vote, you're not going to get the hurricane money you need. And they were putting it in very cynical terms.
Yeah.
Other members were saying, off the record, they were telling me or us like that there was an implication that they felt, or, at least an impression that their mayors or that they got that disaster money and vouchers were right next to each other. And that, of course, would imply to you that the governor his number one priority is to get these vouchers done. He's holding, a lot of money to get disaster relief money to your districts. You don't need to connect those two dots. It's not very difficult to connect those two dots.
It's the implication.
And then other people like the leaders of the Republican Party saying, this is just, we're putting these together because they're both priorities and they're important and they're, not bearing on each other in any kind of dependent way.
Yeah.
So we heard all three or various versions of those. And at the end of the day, everything passed.
Yeah.
And everyone got what they needed. And so it's kind of a distinction without really a difference because it didn't matter.
Yeah, it was something that Democrats tried to point out was like, why are we, going to pass the full appropriations bill altogether? Can't we pass an appropriation for education and then for disaster relief, kind of separating this stuff out? They tried to pass amendments to do that and ultimately got nowhere, so that way people could go on the record as saying, I don't want to fund vouchers, but I will fund disaster relief.
Yeah. I think there's two kind of concrete lessons, though, that can come from this little special session maneuver. The first is that William Lamberth, who
House
carried all the
Majority
bills,
Leader,
House Majority Leader, not the Speaker, that's Cameron Sexton, but also Republican, kind of seen as the second ranking Republican. He comes out of this special session, apparently, having done a lot of the legwork for Governor Lee among the House caucus to guarantee and whip these votes. He comes out with as a great success. He did he carried for the governor all of these priority bills, got them passed, and was the one standing up there fielding questions in the chamber. And so it's he took on something. However he did it, whether it was through these implications or back channel politicking or not, got it done. And everyone leaves happy on the Republican side, or at least, leaves with the people in power leave with what they wanted.
Certainly the Lee aligned Republicans.
The Democrats throughout the disaster committee were bringing up this point again and again. And this is the second, I think, concrete thing, which is that these East Tennessee counties are still in a very precarious financial situation, and there's still a lot of storm damage that's going to take a lot of time to recover from. And the money that was approved is grant loan assistance and interest payment assistance. There's still a lot of actual dollars that these local governments have paid and will probably have to pay. There's business that was lost and jobs that were lost out there. There's, roadway improvements. There's crossing state boundary, complicated federal, local, different responsibility for who needs to fix what. All of those are still very live questions. And the disaster committee meeting was pro forma in that it went through everyone. It was unanimous. Everyone agreed on everything. They passed it and they moved. But the hearings themselves were incredibly emotional. You had these county mayors, grown Southern men, breaking down on the microphone, in some cases Having to leave the room or at least leave the podium because they were just sobbing, giving testimony about what they went through. And that was tough. I think it was, I don't want to say it was embarrassing for them or it was in some way was belittling to them because they were doing what was right for their district, but it was certainly something that you feel could have been done differently or spared or done sooner, or done with a little more dignity in a different way. Yeah. And Democrats were making that point.
They didn't have to go through that.
Yeah, they didn't have to go and basically beg for this money that then what they were given You know, and they're talking about local governments with budgets of hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe $1 million, maybe $2 million, and they're saying we've spent all the money that we have to fix stuff, and we don't have any more money, and we don't know how we're gonna get more money.
Yeah.
And they're telling these legislators it, and then what is approved is like these funds to where local governments will have help paying interest on money that they will borrow themselves. It's not direct aid payment. There's direct aid payment to rebuild one school in East Tennessee.
And even I think what they gave them, they weren't planning on it being enough. I remember in some either committee meeting or on the floor, somebody said something along the lines, and hopefully they'll get more federal money to help with that.
Right. Is at Hampton High School, I think.
Yeah.
So it was like, yeah, there wasn't debate. It passed. The only contentious points were, why did we have to wait this long, and why is it during the vouchers session? And they're like these very, very emotional, difficult testimony that, you know, these mayors have to come give for money that is a rounding error for these state coffers.
And the third and final sort of prong I want to talk about is the immigration piece. And we're probably going to see plenty more in the regular session when it comes to immigration. But, you know, the whole package of the governor's legislation that passed was about $910 million, nearly $1 billion. Almost half of that went to education, the vouchers, school choice thing. Big chunk went to the disaster relief stuff. And then just a little piece went to founding this new immigration department that we're hearing about.
5 million, 6 million, something like that.
5 or 6 million? Yeah. Nicole, tell us a little bit about what that is.
It's supposed to be basically a state level immigration enforcement division that will have its own kind of state deportation czar. And that group is meant to support ICE. That's Republicans. The way that they, you know, communicate this is that the state level should be cooperating with and helping the federal government with their efforts.
Okay.
And so this is kind of a first step, they see it as, to...
Do you recall the name of this department?
Off the top of my head.
Yeah,
no.
sorry. I should
It's
put you on the
okay.
spot.
It's like the Tennessee Immigration Security Office.
It's like
something,
Tennessee
something.
ICE Junior, basically. the little ICE assistants.
Little ICE.
Little ICE.
I think we've just kind of called it in, you know, our writing, just a centralized immigration division, just to kind of...
And also a big thing, it got a lot of press, a lot of media attention, I think, as it should have. A part of the immigration legislation was this piece that says that any city that, you know, calls itself a sanctuary city, any local leaders can receive a Class E felony, right?
Yeah, it's if they're going to take a vote to become a sanctuary city, it's already illegal for cities or municipalities to adopt a sanctuary city policy.
Okay.
But it goes one step further because that's apparently not enforceable in some way. So this kind of creates an enforcement provision that would put on a politician or a local official who votes to enact or for a sanctuary city policy, then that official could be charged with a felony.
And Eli, you reported a little something about this for us. That's, you know, we can't say for certain, but that's pretty likely to be challenged by Nashville, right? By Metro Nashville government.
Yeah, I mean, they just see it as completely ridiculous and total blatant disregard for federal, like the U.S. constitutional First Amendment protections, as well as case law that I don't exactly understand, but you know, whatever versus whatever in 19, whatever, or even earlier 18, where you can't punish a lawmaker for taking a vote on something that they're, you know, elected. If they're duly elected and they're, you know, in a deliberative body, they take a vote on something that's not, doesn't mean that they can have liability, or especially criminal like charges for something that's. It's they're like Turkey, I think right now is being scrutinized because their government just like passed this in their parliament. It's like you can't prosecute a lawmaker for voting on something.
Yeah. Wally Dietz, the Metro legal director, spoke about this in the Friday morning. The mayor has like a media roundtable and he brought this up, right? And kind of called it absurd and all these things.
Yeah, and I think his impression is that they stepped out a little too far as they've done in the past and lost these cases to Nashville specifically. The ACLU also has indicated they're going to mount their own legal challenge, and individual lawmakers I've heard might also be considering talking to attorneys.
Yeah.
Because this is now them in the crosshairs of.
Well, it's interesting to me too. Even Republicans admitted there's no current sanctuary city in the state of Tennessee.
Right.
So they almost created a problem for themselves where there wasn't one to begin with. I guess maybe they're worried crackdown on immigration will lead to
People
some
making that call,
municipalities starting to make that call. But
And that, I mean, it's certainly, again, it's the term sanctuary policy, which I think is the term in the law. That is something that will need to be decided in court of what that means. But we do know, and we're going to be covering this again in next month, that there are lots of rules that decide what can and can't be shared between law enforcement bodies at the local, state, federal level.
Right.
Davidson County has the sheriff's office. They have a jail. They have like Metro Council. They have their own set of laws and law enforcement, and there are certain things that they don't have to share, or that they can be compelled to share.
Yeah.
Outside of that,
And of course, a big part of putting immigration in the special session was President Trump has indicated obviously this mass deportation stuff he wants to do, and sort of Tennessee being one of the states that's just sort of showing we're going along with this policy.
that was the overwhelming impression of the whole special session.
yeah, I mean, Governor Lee said in his post-session press conference just that, repeating the same thing that we've heard Republicans across the country say, that Trump's election was a mandate, that elections across Tennessee were a mandate, that they are supposed to be doing something about school choice, about immigration. Those are the policies that their constituents care about.
And this is the same Bill Lee who Trump insulted a few months ago? Is that
Calling him a rhino.
A rhino, Republican in name only?
I think they must have made up by now.
Well, I know he said that they had a very lovely call the other day. So
Again, Lee wasn't really anywhere. I mean, it was his special session. It was his voucher bill. We got the press release at the end of the session. He didn't address the body.
Yeah, he came up, I mean, we did the press conference afterwards, but it wasn't, you're right, it wasn't for the whole body. And I do wonder if it's because the state of the state's coming up, and so he's kind of going to do his victory lap in front of them then.
February
Different
10th.
governors do different things, but like I said earlier, it really is William Lamberth who, bring up Trump a lot, was hearing what Democrats were at, their proposed amendments, striking them down, moving on, getting Zachary or another Republican Faison. There's sort of there was a posse clique that was emerging, that if you watch these meetings again and again, there's the same 4 or 5 Republicans that were really steering business and moving it along quickly. And that, I think, is an important lesson.
Yeah, I think they all share in some way or another some kind of leadership position within the party. And, I think that's why, for those maybe who don't watch this stuff as often, those people and those names that you hear, are important to watch, throughout the session going forward.
Yeah.
They're going to carry more legislation because they're chairs, and those sorts of things.
And
so those
Faison
are the people
is
to watch.
Faison's the Republican caucus leader. Lamberth is the majority leader. Cameron Sexton is the Speaker of the House. And it's also kind of interesting, and we got to wrap up, but it's also interesting just to see how much power these folks wield, and because a lot of times they're from pretty small districts. I mean, William Lamberth is from Portland, a town in Sumner County, north of Hendersonville, where I grew up. It is not a big community, but here he is, probably the second most powerful Republican in the legislature.
Certainly, and during this special session, probably the most important figure on
Jeremy
the Hill.
Faison from a relatively small town as well. So it's interesting to see, these guys elected, in pretty small districts, then sort of controlling so much of the conversation.
The words like sanctuary city or DEI or there are these certain catchphrases that connect to national politics, specifically Trump politics, that they came into this special session with that on their mind.
Yeah.
And that's what they went after.
Well, we'll have plenty more to talk about when the regular session kicks off. We're still, I guess, amid the regular session. There'll just be sort of a recess.
Yeah, they're recessed. The House returns on Monday.
Okay.
They will be conducting business, and then the Senate returns on the 10th.
And the 10th is also when Bill Lee will give his State of the State, basically like the State of the Union, but at the state level, and talking about his policies and probably doing a little bit of a victory lap.
The bill filing deadline is also February 6th.
Look at all these things just falling into place.
What's even left to do? I thought we just got everything out of the way.
They have to pass an overall budget. That's pretty much it. That's their only
technically
thing that
the
they
only
have to
thing
do.
the only thing the state constitution requires of both chambers is that they pass a budget, balance the budget. So
The joke around, the media has definitely been can't we just get back and pass a budget so we can all go home?
yeah, sounds great. Wonderful. Well, thank you guys for joining me. Thank you for working so hard during the special session to get it all covered. It's been great coverage, and there'll be more where that came from. So thanks for being here and joining us. Follow the Williamson scene as well.
Yeah, follow the Williamson scene.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, guys.